Hello and welcome to Frank's School. This looks like a lot, but I actually don't think it's that much. This is the second day of the second semester, fourth year. And what of the three things I'm going to be doing, here's where I'm going to start. Simon Schama's History of Britain, and his first episode out of 15 is called Beginnings. And this will be guided viewing. I'll have comments to guide you, to tell you what to look for, to try to catch some of the words and things. I've done a similar thing with the story of English and the day the universe changed and quite a few Shakespearean films and other things. Well, at the beginning of Schama's work, he talks about the Romans and Tacitus. Well, in a way, yeah, when I first saw that, I thought, oh no. Well, it's the history of Britain, and history in Britain, when things were actually written down, probably begins there. Well, unless you count the runes. And I thought, oh my, there was so much in Britain before the Romans got there. Isn't he going to deal with it? Well, yes, he is. So I was very relieved then to find him talking about Schama Bray. I knew about it, but not as much, and I, of course, found it fascinating. It's in the Orkney Islands. This was a prehistoric settlement. He might have used the word Celtic. I'm not even positive if it was Celtic. It might have been before that. And happily, he goes all around it and looks at it, and I'd like to point out that that was built as opposed to a cave. People talk about cavemen, but there aren't caves everywhere. But in a way, it was cave-like. And there were 12 houses. Well, that so fits in with what I was just talking about with prehistoric village planning, pre-centric. I'm going to start to use that word more often. Before everything got centralized. Pre-centric, or pre-centralist. Villages. So there was one, and it's great. Now, at one point, I say, what did he say? And he was saying what the runes of the Vikings came through, or the Norsemen or whatever, and they left these runes on the walls. And he had used the word graffiti. But then this is what I heard, and I use my spelling when I really am not sure how to write down what I just heard. And I even asked my son, I played it by, and I said, what does he say? And he said the same thing. Hidegirth is one horny bitch. That was graffiti. Yeah, there you go. That's what the Vikings wrote on the wall. So that'll be bound to get students' attention, your attention too, maybe. Around that ended around 2500 BC, and I'm still puzzling. Did he say Celtic? I'm not sure. I find it more interesting to me now, since Shirley and I have been to two Celtic pre-centralist villages in Portugal. Well, the one in Galicia and the other in Portugal. He talks briefly about Stonehenge, and I think that's right. There's plenty said about Stonehenge. Mentions the metalwork, especially gold. And there's one of those things where, I talk about craftsman's memory as opposed to history. When I look at an object like that gold work or that metalwork, it speaks in a language that doesn't really require words. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with words. It's a kind of a record. It's a kind of a memory. It's a little hard to talk about because you got to use words, but it's reason to see that stuff. He mentions the long barrow at West Kenneth. I think I'm getting these words right. The gold druids. He doesn't say too much about the druids, these ancient priests. These are fascinating subjects, which you could, if you had a class, say you could break that class out into saying, hey, you, go find out what the druid, what he means by the druids. Hey, you, are red bream a kind of fish? I think it failed around that time because of climate, if I understood him right. Actually, I think some of this stuff that he seems more sure about, people aren't so sure. Well, Julius Caesar arrived, I think he said 55 BC. I was a little bit surprised to hear that Julius Caesar's invasion was not very successful. Uh, you'll see, as he's talking about that, you'll see the famous White Cliffs of Dover. You might have heard of them. Well, there they are. Claudius, I think he said around 100 years later, he successfully then conquered Britain. Here comes the centralizing effect of, you see, I said that I was going to be looking through what I talked about like a lens as I look at this stuff. Here comes Rome with its centralization. And they introduced him, he's going to say, into the dulce vita. Well, in Rome, people were actually taking baths. You know, it was they had flush toilets, sort of, and you know, that was appealing, as he points out. But then he gets on to Queen Boudica. Well, that's the way you spell her name usually, but how to pronounce it, this is what I heard him say, Boudica. There is question about how to pronounce her name. Now, she, of course, is fascinating. I think there might have fairly recently been a documentary or a movie made about Queen Boudica. Palace at Fishbourne, I can't remember at this moment if that's where she was raised. Here's Tiberius Claudius. This, I think, is the Roman governor who took that land and made it into a slave province. That's interesting enough. I don't really have to say anything about it. I'm sure your viewers will have attention. Colchester was where the destruction occurred at the great temple of Claudia. And there I would ask you to stop. I think the place to stop, I would say, is 26:45 at the 26-minute 45th second. I think that's plenty. That's a good place to stop. Maybe that's a little too much. I don't know. Now, Arminius, Prince of Arminius, he was mentioned, and I looked into him. And one of the things I'm going to be doing, I'm going to try to do as I go through this guided viewing, is talk not only about Britain, but what was going on, especially in Germany and especially in Portugal, to the extent that I can. Well, Arminius, he was Prince of Cherusci. I looked him up, AD 9. He led the most successful, I think, of all instigations against the Romans at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Last spring, I was very near that place, very near that monument. And it's worth looking into. All right, well, we've got things started. See you next time.